right, well, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us for Behind the Divs, a look at Find Your Way to Oz, one of the new Chrome experiments built by Unit 9. Today, my name is Pete LePage. I'm a developer advocate on the Chrome team, and today I'm joined by some of the guys who built Find Your Way to Oz from the Unit 9 team. To my left, I've got Enric Bregman. To his left, I've got Yates Buckley. And then Silvio Paganini, who's going to show us some of the cool tech stuff. If you haven't played with Find Your Way to Oz, if we can maybe put the URL up on screen right now. It's findyourwaytooz.com. And really cool Chrome experiment. Really awesome way to go see a little bit about the movie, to try and go do some really neat things. Why don't you guys tell us a little bit about some of the things that users can do when playing around on the site, and then we'll talk about how we built, or how you guys built some of these things.
Sure. The beginning of the project was really trying to figure out how could we tell a story about this film without telling the same story as the film, or more, how can we make an interactive experience that leads you to the film. And so very quickly we began to focus on the circus and also the storm scenes, which were part of the film. We watched the film, and we felt really attracted to those two sections in the film experience, and we felt, wow, there's a lot of stuff that you can do there that'll be fun interactively. And so focusing on the circus, first of all, felt very natural. Very quickly we became attached to this line called Find Your Way to Oz, which became the main site URL eventually. Yeah. And that's really the mission for the user online. It's every step of the way, everything that you do takes you one step closer to the world of Oz on film.
Okay.
And so that became a really fun brainstorm. Well, what can you do in a circus? What are the things, the attractions that you can have fun with, and how could we infuse those attractions with characters from the film? The first one would be a classic character cutout type experience, which is adding your face to the characters' bodies. Then we came up with a whole range of ideas, but we zeroed in on that. Then it was really fun for us to think about a musical experience, and that was led by tech as well. The web audio just felt like a really fun, natural thing to play with. So a musical organ became our next focus, our next idea. And then finally, we had an idea to create a movie type capture attraction. And that came from the film. I've seen in the film where Oscar, who is making his way to Oz, has a zoetrope in one of his tents, in his main tent.
I think that was when we were looking at some of the prototypes, the zoetrope was one of my favorite things, just to see that happen in real time and get built up. Yeah. We're going to talk about some of the prototypes and that kind of stuff in a sec, but Sylvia, why don't you pop over to the computer over there, if you don't mind, and just sort of bring up the demo, and let's have a look at some of the things that are going on within the demo. Right. So that as we're talking through some of these things, we can sort of...
The website demo?
Yeah, the website, sorry, yes.
Sorry, the website, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, another interesting thing was, while we were developing it, we actually came up with many different prototypes, and I think the technology breadth in terms of the exploration phase was very wide. Okay. But it was funny because some of the things we came up with maybe were kind of like too tech for a circus, for that scenario. They kind of were not. They didn't make you feel that. They didn't create that dreamy space.
Okay. Well,
here we're looking at inside of one of the scenes of the Mason. You see actually the photo booth and some of the
cool.
options.
So if we go into the photo booth,
yeah.
Can we get rid of the URL on screen right now?
Yeah. So this is the photo booth capture, and there's a really nice transition in sort of like a lens change there in the 3D engine. Oh,
all right.
Sorry, I'm looking.
So we're looking at the screen here. I know you guys can't see us, but as this is, unfortunately, there's no camera on the computer that we're doing this demo on, so it makes it a little bit harder to show this off, but you can try this on your own. Does the music box work for, would we be able to give that one a shot?
Yeah, you should be able to work with the music box,
In all of the the interactions that we had in all of the attractions,
Mm-hmm.
we have a really nice mix of very classic assets, which is hand-painted textures, such as in the photo booth and also here on the music box, hand-painted character textures, combined with these WebGl models. And then the interface on top, which is something that allows you to edit and change what you're seeing.
Cool. So that's sort of a good transition point as we look at some of these things. What was building some of these things like? Because I remember seeing early on we had a whole bunch of prototypes for some individual things, and then we said, okay, well we're going to put all these pieces together. And Silvio, if you want to come on back and we can talk about some of those things. What was the process like to build these out? What were some of the things that you guys went through? I know there's a lot of WebGL involved in this. There's a lot of CSS animations. There's a whole bunch of sprite stuff. What's going on? Like, how did you build some of these things?
Yeah, so basically we started prototyping most of the technology we could use using Chrome. And one of really interesting things to use.
Can we pull up Silvio's desktop?
Yeah, so one of the first ones was the card loading. So it's all CSS3 transitions. So here you can see on the fly like all the values for the WebGl transform. So as you hover your mouse, you're just using the transformations and the 3D transformations of it.
Yep.
Like you could click and see the other side of it, which is basically the whole concept behind it. The website was two sides of us. That was the first one. It's live one here. We actually have another prototype for 3D. You want to show some 3D as well?
Yeah, definitely.
So actually we can go for the sprite sheets maybe, for the high DPI devices. So one thing that was quite neat, like the experience works for both the normal screens and the high DPI screens. And one way to do this was to use the sprite sheets and the new CSS properties for that. So my screen is not high DPI, but we can see this, but at least you can see the whole story about this. So you can see the sprite sheets on my machine here. It's probably PNG, you can't see much, but all the assets are in one PNG, and then we just control them on the DOM.
Okay, cool. So if we can come back to us for a sec. One of the things I think is really fascinating was how you guys did think through how to deal with high DPI screens as well as how, on non-high DPI screens. What challenges did you face when thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a sort of an infrastructure decision. A lot of the things we had to deal with technologically became quickly kind of infrastructure decisions. Like, how do we set this up so we don't have to worry about it later, and that the creative team can just work along and not have any bad surprises later on. So we were always kind of double thinking what might go wrong in a way in that sense. And one of them was the high DPI, which I think tied really well with the sprite sheets application, because then you can just pick the right asset on the fly and deal with this kind of problems. So
now, are you sending high DPI images only to devices that deserve them and lower to?
Yeah, so basically we load for the normal sprite sheet for all devices, and if we detect there's a high DPI device loading the website, then we load a new one.
And how did you do that? What was the mechanism you used to do that?
There's one, if you can show my screen, there's one command we found out, which is window.aspect ratio, device pixel ratio.
Yep.
And then this will show like the high, which screen
so you can go
with.
through. Okay.
Yeah. So on a high DPI screen, you show here 2 as a result, and on my screen, of course, it's showing 1 because I don't have the high DPI one. So that's a trick that we used.
Now, were you checking for the straight up value of 2, or were you checking for greater than 1?
Greater than 1.
Yeah. And that's the right way to go. I was dealing with one project a couple of months ago, and they had assumed that the device pixel ratio value would always be a whole number, and it was like 1.4 or 1.3, so it was getting, when they were doing some math on it, it was coming down to 1, and everything just looked wrong. We were trying to figure out what was going on, and as it turns out, that was the reason. So you want to definitely make sure when you're looking at that number that be aware it might not be 2
Yeah.
or 1. It might be somewhere in between. It might be higher. You know, at some point, hopefully, we'll get even higher DPI displays.
At
and
some point, yeah.
yeah, that would be really kind of cool. Cool.
Yeah, I think the thing I really wanted to show also that it kind of falls in with this idea of the DPI and trying to handle problems is if you could throw sort of like the first video, if you could launch that. Basically, a lot of the site in it had, we used the control panel to control settings that were critical to the experience, and it was kind of bizarre. The team was a very big team actually overall, the dev team especially, and the creative team as well. So it was very difficult with certain problems you run into to get everybody to agree on what's really going on, what really needs to be done.
Right.
And is that video up now? Is it running?
It just finished running.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's.
No, sorry.
Oh,
The video is the first one. It's like a.
is that okay? And after we do that, one thing I do want to mention for people who are watching this live, we do have a moderator queue that you can ask questions at. So if Paul, when you get a sec, if we could put the moderator link up for the questions, please post your questions there so that we can try and answer some of your questions live as we go today. I've got a computer up here so that I can see what the questions coming in are, and we can go from there. So that it looked like.
Yeah. So basically, the story is that to keep to make this kind of content with a bigger team, you need to have sort of a middle ground. You need to create a middle ground which you can use to sort of tweak values or not and agree together at whether that particular saturation or that particular how strong one particular effect or another can work together. Because every part of the team doesn't necessarily have the whole picture. So it was always kind of iterating through things, and for everything we created, we create an interface for it, a live interface that people could try changing. So I encourage people, I think one of the most fun aspects of the site is to, if you look at the beginning of the HTML5 Rocks site, is if you call the site with debug equals on, and then press Control I think it is, and then you'll have a drop down with all the controls that we've exposed. And that's quite a good, it's a lot of fun to discover what's been.
It was amazing for the team because we had a lot of sort of distance between everybody, not just geographically, but also in terms of, let's say, the expertise that everybody has. So a WebGl 3D team might not necessarily get too involved with the hand-painted skies that we were making. And for there to be a kind of feedback loop between those teams constantly trying to adjust and perfect things kind of didn't make sense. It felt better for everybody to be able to get their part of the whole piece perfect first before integrating it with a greater project. So it was a very smart way to give everybody control of what they were making and to share very quickly the kind of perfect settings from everybody's perspective. And then in the end there's a process of choosing one of the several options.
Right.
But that makes it a fun process rather than a very stressful one.
Yeah. And by being able to give everybody that opportunity to play and experiment on their own, they really have that, like, I can feel how my value is going in, and then when we talk about it as a team, we can really sort of take it.
And most importantly, you can be wrong. Because it's obviously very frustrating if you say, oh, let's make it 2, and then it's actually 2. Oh, no, let's make it 2.5. Oh, no, actually, let's make it 1.5. That becomes very stressful if that loop goes to the whole team and it takes people's time.
Right.
If it's you yourself, you can experiment, you can play, you can go wrong, you can go back, and only when you're comfortable, you can share. So that's a detail. It makes sense, it just makes it easier and more fun for the whole team.
Yeah. Speaking of the team, how big was the team who worked on this?
I mean, it was quite big. I mean,
we
had this Skype chat open with I don't know, it was like, maybe about 12 people on it at any one time, and it's been going on for months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we have different chats.
And we have different chats as well, but there's one main one, which is the main. Yeah, there's a lot of people and a lot of specialists, that are doing very particular work that nobody else understands. So it's like.
And you guys were also really distributed as well, weren't you?
Yeah.
So where was?
So the backend team is in Poland.
So we have a
3D
backend
in
team
Florence,
in Poland, which was doing backend and mobile.
Yeah, mobile. Yeah.
And then we have the guys in Florence doing the 3D.
Wow. Okay.
We had the guys in Stockholm doing the designs.
Yeah.
We had the guy in Barcelona.
Yeah.
The team in London.
Yeah. I think that's the main.
That's the main thing. Yeah.
And there were a few other extra bits here and there.
Yeah.
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 It's sort of a lot of specialists who come on board for a certain time, then somebody else takes over, and then the first team comes back and makes changes, and
Yeah.
it's a really nice back and forth that way. But everybody was very engaged.
Okay.
In a way, that distance starts to fall away when people are really passionate about
Right.
what they're making, and
Yep.
when it seems to work, when you sort of feel like there's constantly progress, everybody becomes very engaged, in spite of the distance.
Yeah. Yeah. Beyond some of the CSS Sprite things, let's sort of pop over to talk about some of the WebGL stuff, because this is such a beautiful WebGL experience, right? Like, it really does take full advantage of the GPU to just create real moving stuff. I think when we were talking earlier, Henrik, you were talking about how just all of the scenes are hand painted, and being able to get that stuff in is just such an art form now. And going to there is pretty phenomenal. So why don't we talk a little bit about how that process worked? And I think we talked earlier about maybe doing the, let's have a look at this one. If we can switch to the laptop up here for a sec. So do you want to tell us what this is? And
Yeah, so basically that was one of the early prototypes we've done with the whole elements on the scene plugged in from the 3D. And that was just to see how the camera movement would be on the environment while deciding, and see how many objects we could load on real time for the WebGl to handle. So it was one of the first and most effective ways to see how WebGl was going to perform in every single machine.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we went through iterations. We had to establish a pipeline for the 3D, and that was a very early critical aspect of the whole project, because the particular they're basically it's still early days in some of these technologies, and so the setting up a good pipeline is just something that, you know, for WebGl is something that we hadn't really dealt with at this scale before.
Yeah.
And so there was a bit of tooling that went on beforehand. We had to convert some tools we had before to try to figure out how to support things like bones animations, this kind of stuff. And
Now, what are bones animations?
that basically means that you just save, rather than animating every point of a joint that's animating, you can animate the angle, basically the change in angle of one item. So basically, it saves a lot of space rather than and it also allows you a more intuitive, if you want, control of the scene in that sense. And you'll see that in the balloon. And the balloon at the end, the balloon is bending in a way, and it goes through the wind. That's run by this bone system that isn't by default supported. You know, it's something that we had to create. Yeah. And then it's on the HTML5 Rocks site, we've sort of focused on wind was a very important theme of the whole site. So we've focused on what we did to create the wind effect. And if you go to the HTML5 Rocks demo site, there was a number of prototypes. One of them we're showing here, in which you see how this Perlin noise field is generating this kind of mutation of the it's actually what is it? It's a vertex shader that we're changing the position of and modifying them, and again, you have all these settings open again so that we could figure out the detail, and the particles floating around as well are affected by the same kind of flowing field beneath there.
Maybe just show this thing here.
Yeah, if we can just
Can we
pop
get
over
this
to
on
the screen for 1
I
sec.
thought it was on screen. It's not,
Yeah.
So I think that is the demo from the HTML5 Rocks.
Yeah, that's the complete demo.
That's the complete demo. And encouraged to look at it. It's not too complex a scene, and I think quite fun actually, because you've got everything in it, kind of thing there, and all the controls.
You can play around with the controls the same way you play with the website. So we try to do a seamless transition for everyone to understand the tools they were using throughout the whole website development.
So what were the tools you were using? Like, you know, I'm not a WebGL kind of guy. I never got into it, and it sort of often went over my head. So how did you start? Like, what was the process for building
Well,
this?
I mean, this pipeline basically means, okay, we had to find out in the very early days what kind of creative input could we get to create the 3D world and the WebGl world. So we actually went back and tried to convert a tool that we had created before. It was a Flash-based tool, and we converted that to be able to support, you know, converting models, basically animations and models from Maya that then were just be able, you just go through and convert them into a scene.
Yeah.
But it had to be read in a particular way, etc. But once we did that, then it was a matter of honing the different effects. So I think in a way we are in parallel working on optimizing the scene and the shaders that we had to, so that figuring out different shaders for very particular effects. Whether it's a particular lighting effect or a particular like the God rays or we have a nice demo for that lighting. I don't know if you can actually show that. Do you have that? Okay. No. Okay. Anyhow, so
Okay.
and then including one of the shaders for the storm sequence, which is this sort of twirling tornado, which is
if we can pull up that for
has
one
a
sec,
strange
we've got
history
the-
to it, kind of thing in a way.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that?
So this was odd. We went through many iterations of different models to try. Oh gosh, I lost it.
It was initially a nice idea to do a storm, and we felt very drawn to the storm.
Sorry.
But it became very quickly a case of, okay, so how on earth are we going to make
Oh, there it
this
is.
exciting, intense, but also beautiful?
Mm-hmm.
And how are we going to make it interactive?
Yeah.
It was a big challenge. Plus, in the browser,
Right.
dynamically rendered as you go.
Yeah.
And so after a few interesting demos and experiments, we ended up with the shader approach.
Yeah, so what was odd is that basically, I'm also studying neuroscience actually in parallel, and
Yeah.
we've been working on some games for getting basically the idea is that people could help us trace connectivity between brain cells.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of that research, which is not live yet, but I'd encourage people if they're interested to go to brainfly.org and register to keep updated on it. One of the things we did is we created a viewer that shows like the inside of a brain cell. Basically, you could navigate through that.
Oh, neat.
And we have a clip of it that we could show, but I don't know if
that's the brain?
Yeah,
Alright, awesome.
Yeah. So this is like very, very, very small. What you're looking through, it's something like I think it's about 40-50 nanometers, which is very, very small, and you're
Oh,
going
wow.
through. You're going through a connection between one brain cell and another, and problem is that there's so many of them that we sort of don't have any. It's not obvious how we're going to get the manpower to actually trace the connections between this, and this
Yeah.
is why the idea is maybe make a game or something and get people to help us. But we started from that, and we tried adding a twist actually, because it looked a little bit like a tornado. It looked like the funnel of a tornado.
Mm-hmm.
So we added a transformation, like a twist to it, and added some noise to it, and something came out that was very tornado-like. So that then we just had to figure out is how to make it give this wispy kind of effect on it.
Yeah.
And that was done just basically by evaluating it multiple times and mixing these together. So and then once we made that tornado, which we showed earlier in terms of that kind of we then had to get it inside the scene, and then you could probably, if you can, switch to this machine here. We have a picture of the tornado like overlapped with the Shibuya, Tokyo Shibuya background that we grabbed from somewhere. So here you see the tornado just kind of on top of the scene in the background. And to create the storm sequence, basically it are many layers like this. There is a background, and there are like drops on the front screen. There's there are many
clouds.
there's clouds and they're all different techniques actually. So the clouds are a particle-based system, while the clouds are low-hanging. While the tornado is this custom shader, while there's the balloon is a layer that's just for the balloon.
Right.
So it's very complicated to get the balloon to handle the balloon correctly when it goes into the tornado, for example, or when you have certain, or for example, at one point we had to give the feeling that you're being kind of like sucked up like into the whirlwind of the tornado, and we couldn't do that because of the way the scene was structured. So what we had to do is rotate the world around the camera rather than you rotate the camera, because a lot of the objects we had were flat, so the background rotates at a certain point, and it gives you that feeling of you being taken up into this
Cool.
into this space. Yeah.
It's a really nice mix of very new techniques and very classic techniques, very classic filmmaking techniques, lighting and matte paintings in the background, layered up with this very interesting custom shader. And what I find amazing especially is how, for example, the classic matte painting mixes with the shader. It's something that's quite surprising because the shader is always changing, and so the background matte painting is static, but the shader is constantly changing the visual.
That's really cool. Well, so there's a couple of questions up in the moderator queue that I want to take a look at and get your opinion on. So the first question is from somebody in Italy, and they want to know, do you think that WebGl is going to affect a lot of the future of the web?
I have
Yes,
a, I have an
definitely,
opinion. Yeah, go ahead. You
I
can-
think so. I mean, as long as Chrome and the other browsers are trying to push this WebGl, the performance that you can get here is amazing. Like the tornado scene, for example,
Mhm.
is the lightest scene we have on the website. So if
Yeah.
you enter the website, the first scene, the first carnival scene is pretty heavy. My machine is really struggling to keep up. And the tornado itself is a main shader thing, and it's really heavy. Like you don't see any of the
Right.
the fan is running crazy. So I do think like in the near future, the
Yeah.
WebGl is gonna be
Yeah.
a nice thing
Yeah.
to do.
I mean, I think the interesting story is the relationship between the high DPI devices and 3D tech, because
Yeah.
you know, when you're making game design, for example, if you make it in 3D,
Yep.
then you don't have to worry about this issue, and you don't have to worry about the aspect ratio of the phone so much, or the device, because you can just reposition the camera in one way or another and manage to make an experience that people to feel natural with. And I think that's a big driver towards that kind of technology adoption.
All right, cool. Well, somebody from Zurich wants to know, what was the most difficult part? Was there a point where you had to change the plan in order to comply with the technical possibilities? And I think I know the answer to this, but I'll let you guys sort of.
There were many spots like that. It was full of
It's a roller coaster, right? It was absolutely a roller coaster.
You know, and I think that's part of the point of a Chrome experiment. We want, with a Chrome experiment, you're pushing the web, you're doing things that have never been done before, you're taking the browser to its limit, and there are always going to be those places where you're like, and we just fell over the edge. Whoops.
You gotta go back.
You got to pull back a little bit, or maybe rethink, or sometimes hopefully you can get a browser bug fixed. But
I think the storm was probably the trickiest to realize. We were pretty ambitious about making a storm that felt as beautiful and intense as the one in the film. Obviously that story is different, but we wanted it to live up to the film. And I think there were a few points where we thought, well, we're not going to manage. And then I can imagine Yates at home on the weekend working on brainflight.org and having a kind of epiphany moment going, wait a minute, this mouse brain looks just like a storm. And he came into the office and said, okay, whatever you're doing with the storm, stop it. It's not going to work. We're going in a different direction.
so
that was a key moment, I think, where we turned the storm around.
That's funny.
And there was a vision of something that didn't, it looked like a mouse brain. But we were going to make it a storm, and we had a mission, and it worked out.
Yeah.
It was a big risk, but it worked out.
Awesome. Well, we've got another question here from someone who wants. So I guess they were looking at the optimization and wanted to know why you didn't go with the WebP image format instead of PNG, since WebP can be up to almost 25%, 26% smaller.
The only reason I didn't use it because we didn't have a fallback on the CSS for the images. So one thing that we did see for the optimizations is if you look at the timeline on Chrome, every time you apply a style to a DOM element, you get a peak of memory usage.
Yep.
So if you don't have an immediate fallback on CSS for all the images, you had to do inject the CSS for the image on that element. So this would be like a massive problem for performances.
Yeah.
So that's the main reason. And because this runs in other browsers as well, so we try to make it as
right. Yeah, I think that's one ask that I would have for other web developers out there is demand WebP support out of your browser, right? Whether it's Firefox, whether it's Opera, IE, Safari, whatever. We need more people to support this. And we need sort of the other browser vendors to step up.
Yeah.
And as web developers, I think it's our job to go and say to the web browser vendors, we want this, give it to us.
Even if they don't give us, at least the fallback on CSS.
Yeah, or give us a good way to be able to have a fallback or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that's the end of the questions that are up there that people have posted. I'll leave that list up for a second, but I just want to sort of talk a little bit about you guys. So you guys are Unit 9. You do projects like this. Do you want to tell a little bit more about sort of Unit 9, some of your fun things you guys do?
Yeah, we do. This is probably the peak of the excitement in terms of the jobs we do. I think this is. I mean, that have the client come in and say, we want you to make an experiment for us is just like it's just like a dream come true.
Yep.
Say, okay, we're gonna go totally crazy here and do everything we never dare doing ever in other situations. but yeah, we do this kind of thing and these kind of jobs. Yeah, I've been doing it for a while. We like to work in a very open way. You can find the full credit list of everybody that worked on this job, every name if you go through the site. And you know, we're very open about other collaborations. This job wouldn't have been possible without support from other key partners in this job. And so we kind of believe in that sort of video game model where you just get the best people together and do the best job.
Yeah. What's the website for you guys?
Oh, unit9.com. Yeah.
Unit9.com, so nice and easy to remember. One of the things that I also want to call out is you guys wrote a phenomenal HTML5 Rocks tutorial, or well, I guess it's more of a case study.
Yeah.
But went through how you built a lot of these things. There's great code samples. There's a couple of things that people can go in and play with, diving deep into this kind of stuff. So definitely check that up. It's up on html5rocks.com. You can go see that there.
Yeah, it's been very successful as well. Yeah, I really recommend it. We made an effort to pick out and make prototypes that you can chew on, so you don't have to get the whole code base and still can have some fun.
If you have a look on Google Code, there's the full code for everything as
well.
well.
Oh, phenomenal!
Yeah.
And we have the prototype codes for everything there as well. So just go and
plenty to look at.
That's awesome.
Yeah, there's some.
So if somebody were to go pull that down, could they just upload it to their own little server and get it running reasonably well?
Yeah, the whole website is coded in CoffeeScript, so also there's a cake file which compiles the whole thing up.
Sweet.
So
All right, and you're hosting it on App Engine?
App Engine,
yes. The App Engine code is not currently up there.
Okay.
I think for security reasons,
Yeah,
we're sort of waiting on that.
Some of the back end stuff.
Yeah, but otherwise, everything's there. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that's about all we have time for today. We're just at about 35 minutes. I want to thank you guys for coming in. It was a really great opportunity to learn a little bit more about this. I hope you guys watching live learned something new and enjoyed it. Definitely go check the site out at findyourwaytooz.com. It also works, we didn't dive into this at all today, but the mobile experience is pretty slick. I can pull it up on a phone or a tablet, whether it's an iPad or whether it's a Nexus device, an Android device. So definitely go check that out. You can try it in Chrome for Android. You can try it in a couple other things. So thank you, gentlemen. And thank you guys for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.